The night I told my husband I would not carry another baby, he did not raise his voice. He did not slam a door. He did not do anything at all. And that was the part that frightened me most. He just sat at the edge of our bed in the dark, his hands on his knees, his head slightly bowed, and he breathed. In and out. In and out. The way a man breathes when he is choosing between two things, and you do not yet know which one he will choose. I had 6 children. The youngest was still nursing. My body had been given to this community, to this marriage, to these pregnancies, for 11 years without pause. And the night I finally said the words out loud, I did not feel brave. I felt like a woman standing at the edge of something, with no way of knowing how far down the bottom was. I need to tell you what happened next, but before I do, I need you to understand something about what it means to refuse a baby inside an Old Order Amish home. Because it is not simply about a husband and a wife and a decision made in the dark. It is about something much larger than both of them. Something that has been building for generations in barns and kitchens and back pews. And it does not stop building just because one woman finally says, I cannot. Before I go any further, I want to say something directly to you. More than 90% of the people watching these videos have never subscribed. And I understand that, I do. But if you have ever sat in a dark room and felt something in you quietly break, if you have ever swallowed a word because you were too afraid of what saying it out loud would cost you, then these stories were made for you. Please subscribe. It costs nothing. It keeps this channel alive, and it keeps these words from disappearing back into the silence they came from. And before we go on, I want to ask you something in the comments. Have you ever wanted to say no to something and found that your whole world had been arranged so that you could not? Tell me. I will read every one. My name is Martha, and this is Hannah the Amish Girl, the channel where the stories Amish women carry in their chests for decades finally get spoken out loud. I grew up Old Order in Geauga County, Ohio. I married at 19. I left at 30. And what I am going to tell you today is something I have never said in its full shape before. Because the full shape of it was something I could only see clearly once I was on the other side of it. When I told Jonas I would not try for another baby, our 6th child, our daughter Ruth, was 4 months old. She slept in the cradle beside our bed, her small chest rising and falling in the dark. And she had no idea that her mother was about to say the thing that Amish wives do not say. Not ever. Not to their husbands, not out loud. Let me back up so you can understand how I arrived at that night. My first pregnancy was hard. My second, harder. By the third, I had learned that my body was not built for easy carrying. I was sick in ways the midwife described as serious, in ways that required bed rest I could not take because I had 2 children already and a house to run and a husband who needed feeding. With my 4th child, I lost so much weight in the first months that my mother cried when she saw me. With my 5th, I hemorrhaged after the birth in a way that the midwife did not speak about directly, but that I could read in her hands, the way they moved, the speed of them, the silence. With Ruth, my 6th, I was 30 years old, and I lay in bed for 3 days after she came, and I thought, if there is a 7th, my children will grow up without a mother. That is not something I said to anyone, not to Jonas, not to my mother, not to God even in my prayers, because saying it felt like a door I was not sure I should open. But I thought it. Every day I thought it, while I nursed Ruth and watched her face and counted her small fingers. I thought, I cannot do this again. My body is telling me something, and for the first time in my life, I am going to listen to it. Now, here is what you need to understand about babies inside an Old Order Amish community. Children are not simply children. They are evidence. They are evidence of a wife's submission, of a family's faithfulness, of God's blessing being actively received rather than turned away. A large family is proof that you are living correctly. A woman who has 6 children and then stops is a woman who has decided she knows better than God. And that is not a small thing. That is not a private thing. That is a thing the entire community will have an opinion about and will not keep that opinion to itself. I knew all of this when I lay down beside Jonas that night. Ruth was breathing in her cradle. The house was quiet, and I said it in the plainest words I had. Jonas, I cannot carry another baby. My body cannot do it again. I am asking you to hear me. He went still. That stillness. I had seen it before, twice before, in different moments, when I had said something that landed outside the boundaries of what a wife was supposed to say. It was not anger. It was something colder than anger. It was the stillness of a man recalibrating, deciding what the correct response was according to a script he had been given before he ever met me. He sat like that for what felt like a very long time. Then he said, quietly, without turning to look at me, "We do not decide these things, Martha. God decides." He lay down. He turned his back. And the conversation was over. Except it was not over. It was not anywhere near over. What I did not understand yet was that the moment I said those words, a process began. Not a dramatic process, not a visible one. Something slow and communal and deeply practiced, the way Amish communities have always handled a wife who has stepped outside her lane. And I would not fully understand what that process was or how far it had already spread until the morning 3 weeks later, when my mother-in-law showed up at my door with her coat still on, which meant she was not planning to stay long, which meant she had come to say one specific thing. She stood in my kitchen. She looked at Ruth in my arms. She looked at my face. And then she said, "Martha, I heard something that I am hoping is not true." She did not say what she had heard. She did not need to. The only question was how it had traveled from my bedroom to her ears in 3 weeks. And that question answered itself. Jonas had told his father. His father had told her. And she had come to see for herself whether the woman her son had married was the kind of woman who refused her God-given purpose. I want to pause here because this is the part that people outside the community struggle to understand. Jonas did not tell his father because he was cruel. He told his father because that is how the community functions. There is no private conversation between a husband and wife that does not also belong in some way to the larger body of the church. A wife who is behaving incorrectly is a community problem, not a personal one. The community has tools for this, practice tools, and those tools were now being assembled. Over the next 2 weeks, here is what happened. My sister-in-law Rebecca came over one afternoon and spent an hour talking about a woman in her district who had stopped having children after 4, and how that woman's husband had grown distant, and how the church had had to get involved, and how it had all ended badly for everyone, especially the children. She said this while folding my laundry, never once looking at me, the way Amish women deliver information that is not information, that is warning. The bishop's wife came. She held Ruth and said she was beautiful, and then she said, "A full quiver is a blessed quiver, Martha. The Lord knows what we can carry even when we think we cannot." She smiled at me warmly when she said it. That was the most frightening part. The warmth. My own mother came and sat at my table and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "Your grandmother had 9. Your great-grandmother had 11. We do not come from women who stop." And then one Sunday after church, an older woman named Edna, a woman who had buried 2 husbands and raised 13 children, and who was considered one of the wisest women in our district, sat down beside me on the bench while the men were still talking outside. And she spoke to me in a low voice, without turning her head, the way a woman speaks when she knows she is being watched, but she needs to say the thing anyway. She said, "Child, I am going to tell you something that nobody told me, and I want you to hold it somewhere safe." She paused. She straightened her apron. She said, "When a wife refuses one baby, that is fear, and the community will pray for her fear. When she refuses a second, that is the beginning of what they call willfulness. And willfulness inside an Amish marriage is handled the same way every generation handles it, by removing the warmth until the wife is cold enough to want it back." I had heard versions of this before, that phrase, the warmth. I had heard older women use it in passing, as though everyone knew what it meant. But Edna was the first one to explain it to me like a system. She said, "First, your husband will be distant, already happening. Then his family comes, already happening. Then the women at church begin to see through you instead of looking at you, already starting. Then your own family begins to wonder if they have failed you somewhere, and they pull back to show the community that they take these things seriously. And then, child, you wake up one morning and the only warm thing in your entire world is your husband's approval. And you will walk through any door to get it back." She looked at me once, just once. She said, "That is not God's will. That is men's machinery dressed up in God's language. But knowing that does not make the cold any less cold. So I am telling you so that when it happens, you know what it is. You know that you are not going mad. You know that it is a system and that you are not the first woman it has been used on." She stood up. She smoothed her dress. She walked back toward the tables. I sat on that bench for a long time after she left. Here is what I want to tell you, what I want to say very plainly so that it cannot be misunderstood. What Edna described, that slow communal withdrawal, that organized removal of warmth, that engineered loneliness designed to make a woman surrender her own body's limits, has a name. My therapist, years later, said it to me in a quiet office with a window that looked out onto a parking lot. The most ordinary window I had ever stared through, while hearing something that rearranged the floor beneath me. She called it coercive control. She called it consent manufactured through isolation. She said, "What was done to you was not marriage. It was a system of pressure so complete that your yes was never really a yes, because the cost of no had been made unsurvivable." In our community, we did not have those words. We had only one word. We called it being a faithful wife. I need you to hear this next part carefully, because it is the part I did not understand for a very long time. Jonas was not a monster. He was a man who had been given a script for how to be a husband, and who had followed that script the way you follow a road you have always been told leads somewhere good. He had been raised inside the same silence I had been raised inside. When he told his father, he believed he was doing the right thing. When his mother came to my door, she believed she was protecting my marriage. When the bishop's wife sat in my kitchen and spoke about quivers, she was repeating words that had been spoken to her, and to the woman before her, and to the woman before that. Nobody in that chain believed they were doing harm. That is the most important thing I can tell you. Nobody in that chain believed they were doing harm. The system is the thing. not the people. The system that takes a woman's exhausted, bleeding, medically serious no and reclassifies it as a spiritual failing. The system that deputizes mothers and sisters and bishops' wives to carry the message so no one man has to be responsible for what the message does to the woman who receives it. The system that calls the manufactured surrender a choice and the manufactured warmth love, because the people inside it genuinely cannot see the machinery beneath the warmth. I endured 3 more years. I did not have a 7th child. That is a longer story, with details I am not yet ready to give. But I want you to know that what Edna told me on that bench became something I carried like a lantern in a very dark house. I knew what it was. I knew when it was happening. And knowing did not make it stop. But it made me a witness to my own life instead of just a victim of it. And witnessing was the thing that eventually made leaving possible. The shunning came. Of course it did. It came the way all those women had told me it would. Slow at first, and then everywhere at once. My mother's face at the window of a passing buggy, gone before I could wave. My sisters at market, their eyes sliding past me like I was a stranger. Jonas himself, after I left, became, in the community's telling, a man who had suffered, a good man abandoned by a woman who had chosen the world over God. I know that is the story they tell. I have made my peace with not being able to correct it from the outside of it. But here's what I know now, standing on this side. My body was mine. It was always mine. The 6 children I carried came from love that was real. Whatever else was also true. Ruth is 7 now. She has her father's serious eyes and her mother's stubbornness, and she does not yet know the full story of the night she slept in her cradle while her mother changed the shape of everything. One day I will tell her, in plain words, the way Edna told me. That is the only real gift I have. Before you go, I want to say something honestly. I know more than 90% of you watching this have not subscribed yet. And I am not going to pretend that does not matter, because this channel is built on stories that took years and therapy and a great deal of courage to be ready to tell. If this story reached something in you, if it touched something you have not let yourself name yet, please subscribe. It is free. It is the only thing that keeps these stories from going quiet again. And leave me something in the comments. Tell me what part of this stayed with you. Tell me if you have ever had a warmth withdrawn until you stopped asking for what you needed. Tell me if you have your own Edna, the one who told you the truth when everyone else was only delivering the warning. I will read every word. Until next time, remember this. Your body was never the community's business. It was yours on the day you were born. It is yours still.